What's up, everybody? Welcome to Wayfarers Christian Church and welcome to our Sunday live stream. As you can tell, I am not Jeremy Griffin. I'm not my brother. My name is Nick Griffin. I am the lead pastor here at Wayfarers. I'm giving Jeremy the week off and just wanted to take this time to let you know about a few things going on at Wayfarers before we jump into our service this Sunday. First off, we recorded a really awesome Christmas song. Just a few days ago, we posted it on Christmas Day. It was an original song that was written and composed by Joseph Jenkins, our worship leader here at the church. If you did not get a chance to check out that song, I would encourage you, go back, look on our feed if you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube. I would encourage you, go check it out, go listen to the song. I think it's an incredible song that really helps to get us in the mood for this Christmas season. A few weeks ago, it was interesting. I had a friend kind of come up and ask me, what has it been like being the pastor of a church? They said, do you feel much like a pastor? And the reality was I had to answer them that I don't yet. It's been weird. We've been doing these online streams, and I don't really feel like I've fully gotten the experience of being able to really pastor a church and a flock and a group of people. And so we want to take some small steps to kind of remedy that a little bit. And I wanted to make sure that I was making myself and our other teaching pastor, Noah Randolph, available for whatever pastoral care needs you may have. I would encourage you, if you need prayer, if you need counseling, if you just want someone to talk to about things that are going on in your life, even if we are in this online streaming, online church format, that doesn't mean that you can't still reach out to us with any needs that you may have. You can go to our website, wayfarerscc.com, click on the staff page, and you'll find contact info there for both me and Noah. I would encourage you, if you want to talk to either of us, send us an email, contact us through there. If email's not your thing, though, and you just want to reach out directly, give me a call. My personal phone number is 901-552-6567. You can text me, you can call me. I would love to talk to you, whatever is going on in your life, any needs, any pastoral needs that you may have. I want you to know that I am there for you, and I want to help you in whatever way you need that help. So I just really wanted to extend that invitation and let you know that even if it has to be in a socially distanced way, even if you just want to call, even if you want to set up a Zoom call, or I have an office space here on the campus where we stream from, and if you want to meet with somebody, if you have things you want to talk through, if you need counseling or prayer, I'm there for you, and I know Noah's there for you as well. So please reach out. We would love to start building that community here at Wayfarers. Finally, if you didn't get a chance, I would encourage you to find our church's page on Spotify. On that page, we are going to be posting a lot of the worship services that the upcoming services. We're going to post the songs that we are going to be doing each week so that you can kind of learn some of the songs, get ahead of it, and be able to worship together with us. And in this Christmas season, we are also specifically posting just a playlist of a lot of the favorite Christmas songs of a lot of our staff and our volunteers here at Wayfarers. If you want to go on there and see this Christmas playlist that we put together, I would encourage you to go check it out. Look for Wayfarers CC on Spotify. You'll be able to see a lot of our favorite Christmas songs as we continue in this Christmas season. So, without further ado, though, let's get right into our service today. I'm excited that you've decided to join us. Let's jump into the service.
Come in. Oh, hi, do come in. Sir John Betjeman's poem about the church in Aberdeen Park, St Saviour's. But I promised you that I'd read you the Christmas one, so I thought, well, let's have a little bit. We're still in waiting Advent, as he calls it. It's lovely. The bells of waiting Advent ring is how that poem starts. You'll know this one, and it's justly famous. It's got so many details and so many wonderful ways in which just the little details, but in the end it finishes with these great questions, these ringing eternal questions. And is it true? And is it true? And that's wonderful. So, Christmas by John Betjeman. The bells of waiting Advent ring, The tortoise stove is lit again, and lamp oil light across the night has caught the streaks of winter rain. In many a stained glass window sheen from crimson lake to hooker's green. The holly in the windy hedge, and round the manor house the yew will soon be stripped to deck the ledge, the altar, font and arch and pew, so that the villagers can say the church looks nice on Christmas Day. Provincial public houses blaze and corporation tramcars clang. On lighted tenements I gaze where paper decorations hang, and bunting in the red town hall says Merry Christmas to you all. And London shops on Christmas Eve are strung with silver bells and flowers, as hurrying clerks the city leave to pigeon-haunted classic towers, and marble clouds go scudding by the many-steepled London sky. And girls in slacks remember Dad, and oafish louts remember Mum, and sleepless children's hearts are glad. And Christmas morning bells say come, even to shining ones who dwell safe in the Dorchester Hotel. And is it true? And is it true, this most tremendous tale of all, seen in a stained glass window's hue, a baby in an ox's stall, the maker of the stars and sea, become a child on earth for me? And is it true? For if it is, no loving fingers tying strings around those tissued fripperies, the sweet and silly Christmas things, bath salts and inexpensive scent and hideous tie so kindly meant. No love that in a family dwells, no carolling in frosty air, nor all the steeple-shaking bells can with this single truth compare, that God was man in Palestine and lives today in bread and wine. I love that poem. And I guess we don't quite have the blazing pub windows and the throngs Christmas shopping and so it's a little bit more subfusk, a little more subdued, but it's good even so to remember these classic Christmas lines, and I hope they've put you in the Christmas spirit. I love the way it goes from the bells of waiting Advent down finally to the bells of Christmas morn. It's a beautiful poem. Thanks for dropping by.
Awesome. So thankful to have you guys tuning in with us online. Let's worship together.
know you are kind, my God. mine and I am yours. I am yours for all time. I'll sing that you are mine and I am yours. I am yours for all my days. I'll praise your great name, 'cause you are good. You're good to me. Sing of your love till there's no breath in my lungs. I'll praise your name, for you remain the same. I'll sing of your love till there's no breath in my lungs. I'll praise your name, for you remain the same. I'll sing of your love till there's no breath in my lungs. I'll praise your name, for you remain the same. I'll sing of your love till there's no breath in my lungs. I'll praise your name, for you remain the same. I'll sing of your love till there's no breath in my lungs. I'll praise your name, for you remain the same. You remain the same. Oh, you remain the same for all time. I'll sing that you are mine and I am yours. Oh, I'm yours for all my days. I'll praise your great name, 'cause you are good. You're good to me. And we cannot ignore the sins of your son, or the trespasses of your daughter. So you said our iniquities at your feet, our secret sins you'll always see. Yet in your righteousness, your grace is granted. Yet in your righteousness, your grace is granted. We sing. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever the earth and whole world, from everlasting to everlasting you are. Before the mountains were brought forth, forever the earth and whole world, from everlasting to everlasting. You're never changing.
Open our minds to see how you see as we take up the cross the way it's meant to be. But it's not about us, it's about what you've done. So Lord, teach us how to be one. Open our minds to see how you see as we take up the cross the way it's meant to be. But it's not about us, it's about what you've done. So Lord, teach us how to be one and open our mind to see how you see as we take up the cross the way it's meant to be. But it's not about us, it's about what you've done. So Lord, teach us how to be one. How to be one.
Oh, how to be one. How to be one. Show us how. Oh. Everlasting to everlasting you are. One more time, sing before. Before the mountains were brought forth, whatever the earth and all world, from everlasting to everlasting you are. Amen. Here's to the one who made the morning bright. Here's to the one who taught the stars to shine. Here's to the one who gave the dead of night. Pulled me from the dark, set my heart alight. Oh, yeah. Here's to the one who made my heart to sing. Opened up my eyes and washed away my sin. Here's to the one who gave his life for mine. Broke all my chains and set me free, alright. To the way, oh, 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 to the truth, oh, oh, to the life I live in the light you give. Jesus, here's to your name over everything. Oh, oh. Here's to all the things that your love has done. Here's to the way you wiped away my past. Here's to the future and the things to come. Here's to my Savior's everlasting love. To the way, to the truth, to the life I live in the light you give. Jesus, here's to your name over everything. To the way, oh, 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 to the truth, oh, 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 to the life I live in the light you give. Jesus, here's to your name over everything. Oh, yeah.
Here's to your kindness. Here's to your goodness. Here's to your freedom. Here's to the day I see you, Jesus.
Here's to your glory. Here's to your greatness.
Matthew 2, 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." When Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared, he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
Alrighty. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you to all of you who are tuning in. My name is Nick Griffin. I am the lead pastor here at Wayfarers, and I wanted to just, thank you and welcome you and just thank you for tuning in to our service today. I got a special shout out, a special wave and hello that I was tasked with giving to Shelly. So, hey, here's your special wave. She said she was going to be watching, said she wanted a special shout out. So I'm fulfilling that responsibility here. But in general, I really am. I'm thankful to all of you and everybody who is tuning in, everybody who has been tuning in. It's been a great encouragement to me to just see so many friends and family and different people that I know tuning in to hear what we've been doing as we've been getting this church off the ground and started. Over the last few weeks, we have been in a season of Advent leading into Christmas, and we've been trying to focus in on some different Christmas stories and, some different ways of looking at Christmas that might be a little bit not the usual, typical Christmas nativity stories that you may be hearing. Last week, my father-in-law, Tony, actually got to preach, and I'm very thankful for that. He did a great job looking specifically and one of those Christmas stories that doesn't often get focused on, and the hope that we have in the coming Messiah and Jesus Christ himself. But I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that Christmas is not over yet. We spent 4 weeks, it would kind of honestly to me seemed like a really long 4 weeks in this Advent season. And if you're not part of a church tradition that participates in that church calendar that does Advent, you may not know that Christmas is more than just one day. It's not like you have 4 weeks of Advent and then just one day of Christmas and that's it. That would be really unbalanced. In the traditional church calendar and the way a lot of these holidays are celebrated, Christmas is actually a multiple day affair. And in fact, you celebrate Christmas over the course of 12 days. You may have heard the 12 Days of Christmas song that goes through all of the different 12 days of Christmas. That's actually because that's how traditionally in the church calendar Christmas is celebrated. It starts on December 25th, and you celebrate for 12 days ending on January 6th. Those are the 12 days of Christmas, and there's all kinds of different things that go with each of those days. So don't worry if you love Christmas. We are not over with it yet. It's not just that one day. We are going to continue focusing in on some Christmas stories all the way through January 6th. And like I said, those 12 days, they end on January 6th, and January 6th is a very specific and important date in that church calendar. That date is traditionally called Three Kings Day, and it is the day where we celebrate the story that my wife Adrienne just read for you all, the story of the three kings, the Magi, the three wise men, whatever you may have heard. And this day is a day that you may have not had experience celebrating, but personally, I actually have had a lot of experience celebrating this particular day because the Three Kings Day is a huge day in Latin American, South American culture specifically. For those of you who may not know, I was actually born in Uruguay, in the country of Uruguay in South America. Super tiny, small country. The entire country is about the size of the state of Arkansas. It's famous for having lots of cows. They have a population of about 3 million people, about 3 million people and about 9 million cows. So there are 3 cows for every person in the country of Uruguay. But as with many Latin American countries, Uruguay makes a really, really big deal out of Three Kings Day. And my parents, they were missionaries. They had spent time as missionaries in Uruguay, which is why I was born there. And so they wanted to fully participate in all of the customs of Uruguayan culture. And so they also made a big deal of celebrating Three Kings Day whenever I was growing up. It's interesting, in South American and Latin American culture, Three Kings Day is actually the big day when you get all of your presents. You might get like a present on Christmas. You might get like one present that comes from Santa Claus. Papa Noel is what they call him. He might bring you one present or just something small, maybe clothes or socks or something, nothing huge. Three Kings Day is actually the day when kids will get all of their toys and all of the amazing presents. And Three Kings Day is like the pinnacle of the Christmas season for a lot of Hispanic cultures. And it's a lot of fun. You do a lot of similar traditions that you would do at Christmas, but it's related to the Three Kings and not to Santa Claus. So you still leave the tree up, but instead of leaving cookies and milk out for Santa Claus, you leave hay out, straw or grass or hay for the camels to eat, for the Three Kings camels to eat. And there's this weird tradition where you take your shoes and you set your shoes out under the Christmas tree, and the Three Kings will leave presents in the shoes, which is kind of a roundabout way of how we in the U.S. got our tradition of stockings, like hanging Christmas stockings. It's connected to that Three Kings tradition of shoes. I have no idea what the shoes have to do with any of it, but it is one of those traditions of Three Kings Day where the three kings, the three wise men that brought gifts to the baby Jesus, they bring gifts to all of the children in all of these Latin American countries. And it's a lot of fun. It was a tradition that I had a lot of fun participating in whenever I was growing up. And even though we're here in the States, it's one that I want to kind of continue with my son, with Toby, as we grow up. I want him to be able to celebrate Christmas, but also Three Kings Day. And I always like to joke that it's the more Christian holiday. It's the one that follows the Three Kings specifically. And I think it's a great tradition to participate in. But the Three Kings is one of those stories that is really weird, really interesting. There's a lot of details in it that when you really start to dig deep, there are just a lot of things that we can draw out of it that I think are really, really helpful for our day and age and for understanding the significance of the whole Christmas story. So today, that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to just kind of quickly go through. I want to just point out a handful of things that I have noticed as I've been studying this story of the Three Kings, and point out some specific applications that we can get from those different stories. So before I do that, I want to just read the story one more time. We're reading in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. So let me pull this up here. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born the King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. There's a lot of details that we can bring out, but specifically what I wanted to focus on is just a few specific ones that I think have good applications for us. First off, just kind of as a fact so that we can get our setting completely straight here. I think lots of times because of the nativity scenes, we think that this story is happening at the same time as when the shepherds are coming to visit the baby Jesus. But through a lot of the clues that we see in this passage and others, a lot of scholars believe that this story is actually happening even possibly a couple years after the story of the manger of Jesus in Bethlehem. And it's possible that Jesus is even maybe a couple years old at this point. This is not necessarily at the same time. It's really funny. When I first learned this fact, I was like super offended and upset at how much of the nativity and manger scenes always include the little three kings, three wise men in there. And I did this insufferable thing. I remember I had just started college. My mom has all these nativity sets all over her house. And I made it a point to take all of the three kings out of those nativity sets and set them like several feet away in a different part of the house. And so in my mind, I was like, no, they weren't supposed to be there. I need this nativity scene to be historically accurate. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody understood the three kings were not there necessarily at the same time as the shepherds. This is a story that happens a little bit later. But like I mentioned, there's a lot of details in this story that are really key, important details that I think the gospel writer Matthew is including for a reason. The first one is the fact that the Magi come from the east, it says. There's a specific mention of the fact that they come from the east. If you read through the entirety of the biblical story, there is a big significance given to the east. The east of Jerusalem, east of Israel, is where a lot of the lands, a lot of the enemies of the Jews are, whether it's the Babylonians, the Assyrians, any of these Gentile groups that are the oppressors and the enemies and the conquerors of Israel. They are often described as coming from the east. Even as you go later into Revelation, when there's descriptions of this beast that's going to come, it's described as coming from the east. The east is this land that is always focused on and connected specifically to the Gentiles, and even more specifically to the enemies of Israel. When scholars have tried to figure out exactly what the East means as to where did these three kings come from, we really don't know. There's a lot of speculation, but a lot of people think it's possible from Persia, from some of those Assyrian areas, from Babylon. And like I mentioned, from a lot of these nations that are Gentile nations that are actually enemies of Israel. And this is one of the most interesting things about the three kings. They are really, in a lot of ways, contrasted and juxtaposed against King Herod, a Jewish king, supposedly, and all of these Jewish leaders who are supposed to know about the Messiah. They quote a passage from the prophets to Herod. Herod asks, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? And they quote this passage from the prophets saying that he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem. They know their Bible. They know what the Messiah is supposed to do, but yet they can't be bothered to leave Jerusalem and go to Bethlehem, a trip which is maybe 6 miles. And instead, the people who make the trip are Magi from the east specifically. And I think it's very important for Matthew that they are Gentiles, because this is one of the things that we see the writer Matthew bringing up a lot in his gospel, which is that the Gentiles are going to be included in the promise and the blessing of Jesus as the Messiah. It's something that's foretold all the way from the very, very beginning, even in Abraham himself. Whenever Abraham gets his promise in Genesis, right after he is tested by God, sacrificing Isaac, there's a very key passage. It's Genesis chapter 22, verse 18, where it specifically says to Abraham, "And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." See, the plan all along was for all of the nations to be blessed through Abraham. And this is a point that the Jews misunderstood and lost. They thought that the blessing was completely for them. And this is the amazing thing about the story of the Magi, is we are getting that first glimpse of this final and complete fulfillment of that promise to Abraham, which is that the Gentiles are also going to be brought in to the fold. It's also really interesting the specific gifts that they give Jesus. They give Jesus gold, frankincense, and myrrh. If you've grown up in the church, you've probably heard of what some of the significance of these different gifts are, but if you haven't heard, each of them connects very closely with a different aspect of Jesus' character and who he represents. The gold is connected with his kingship, the fact that he is the king, the Messiah, the king of the Jews, and the king of kings, the king of the whole world. And that gold is connected with royalty and with kingship. The frankincense is a type of incense that you burn. And it's specifically connected with the worship of gods. You would burn incense in temples. And even in God's temple, in the temple in Jerusalem, incense burning was a part of their rituals that they did. And so the burning of incense is specifically connected with deity. And so we see in a crazy way the three kings are recognizing the deity of Jesus, the fact that he is God with that gift. But then the final one is the most interesting, which is the gift of myrrh, which is an embalming oil. It's something that you use to embalm dead bodies, to prepare them for burial. This is really the very first foretaste we get in the gospel that Jesus is going to have to go through a death. He's going to have to die for our sins. And so all of these aspects of Jesus' character are foretold in the gifts themselves from the Magi. They have just kind of an incredible insight into who Jesus is and what he is going to do for all of the world. But the last detail, and the one that is the most interesting to me, is the fact that they are called, in this version, in the NIV, they're called Magi. It's a really, really interesting Greek word, magus. What I find lots of times is that translators understand that there are difficult things in the Bible, things that are difficult for us to believe, for us to understand, things that are hard for our culture. And I find that oftentimes translators will pick words that are a little bit easier for us to swallow than how those words are translated in even other sections of the Bible. And this word specifically is one of those. I've kind of been jumping back and forth between different terms and different words to call these three wise men. In the King James Version, they are called kings, and that's where you get the song, "We Three Kings of Orient Are," from the East. They're also called wise men. That's what I grew up calling them, the three wise men. If you read older versions of the NIV, they're called three wise men. And in the newest version of the NIV, the one that I'm reading right now, there's this term they use, magi. That's what they're called, three magi. What's interesting, though, is that this word, I believe, most specifically and most literally, should actually probably be translated some version of magician or sorcerer. In fact, that's actually how it's translated later on. If you jump into the book of Acts in chapter 13, I'm not going to read it today, but go read the story in Acts chapter 13, and you will see this story where the apostles encounter a sorcerer. That's actually what it's called. It's a Jewish sorcerer, a magician, a sorcerer who is involved in some of these occult magic arts. And it's the very same word. It's the very same Greek word that is used in that story in Acts 13. That is the very same word that is used to apply to these three magi. And that's a weird point. What am I trying to make about this point? Well, I think that we kind of have a specific view of the world that we live in today. We have a very modern view of the world that we live in today. And I find that we end up applying our modern perspective, our modern point of view to the Bible specifically a lot. And we think that the Bible is speaking from the same perspective that we are. And a lot of times we have grown up in a culture where we believe that the natural world is all that there is. The world just works in a natural, ordered way. There is no supernatural. Unless maybe you're a Christian, and then you will kind of give an exception or one spot to be like, well, but there is a God. God does exist. He's the one supernatural thing that exists. And then everything else is natural. And in fact, that's the way we even get brought up to talk about it all the time. There just is only one God. There's nothing else supernatural going on in the world. And so we get brought up to believe that there's no such thing as a lot of these magicians, as magic, as ghosts, as all of these supernatural things that were just commonplace in the culture of the Bible. And I would challenge you, if you go back and read through the scriptures themselves, you will find that it is a world that is much more comfortable with the existence of a whole host of supernatural experiences and supernatural beings. One story that's always stuck in my head is of the when Moses is confronting Pharaoh, and he has his staff turn into a serpent. What's interesting is if you read through a lot of that story, you see that Pharaoh has his own sorcerers, his own magicians, his own powerful priests and magic men who end up doing very similar supernatural feats as to what Moses is doing. The supernatural was not exclusive only to the servants of the Lord. You see throughout all of the scriptures that there is a lot of other forces and powers at work in the world. And in fact, the term that gets used for a lot of these other powers in the world is a similar term that gets used for God himself oftentimes. And that's a really complicated thing. I'm sure some of you may be a little bit scared that I'm saying some almost heretical things, some almost things that you may never have heard of. And it would take just way more time to explain a lot of those other supernatural powers in the world than we have time for in this sermon today. But I would encourage you to tune in this Wednesday to our deep dive podcasts that we do live both here on Facebook and YouTube, and you can also find them later in whatever podcast player you prefer. This week, Noah and I are going to dive into that a little bit more, and I want to kind of explain a little bit more of that greater supernatural world that exists out in the Bible, and I think still exists in the world today. Those supernatural principalities and powers are very much a real thing, and it takes a little bit of time to explain how that can be and how that makes sense, even in the modern naturalistic world that we live in today. But why do I bring up that specific point? And what does that help us learn about the Magi? Because remember, I said a lot of these points, a lot of these different ideas that we can learn about the Magi, I think give us specific things that we can apply in our everyday life ourselves. And each of these points, the fact that they were Gentiles, the fact that they brought these 3 specific gifts that really have to do with Jesus, and the fact that they themselves were, in some sense, possibly magicians or sorcerers connected to other supernatural powers in the world. All of these facts, I think, have really interesting and useful implications and applications for us today. The first one is the easiest one, which is that they as Gentiles were the ones that recognized the reality of who Jesus is specifically. And Matthew makes a really big point of this fact, the fact that the Jews missed it. The Jews who were supposedly the ones ready and primed to see the king, the Messiah come, they don't even know he's there. They have to have a group of Gentile sorcerers show up to tell them that the king of the Jews has been born. They've just become completely oblivious to it. And this is a truth that I have found a lot of times in my life. Lots of times we as Christians or as believers, those who are in some ways possibly the most closely connected with God, can unfortunately be some of the same people who are the most blind to the way he is working in the world. And oftentimes it is the Gentiles, the unbelievers, the people from outside of the covenant of God, who have a greater awareness of the realities that we should be living into as Christians than even we do ourselves. I saw this personally in this coffee shop that I used to work at called Avenue Coffee. It was really, really interesting. I was in Bible college here at Mid-South, and I took part in a kind of a spiritual warfare class where we talked a lot about some of the occult practices that exist in the world, and my professor he warned all of us about specifically he specifically was focusing on the game Dungeons and Dragons, and how we needed to be very wary of this. We needed to turn away from it. It leads you into the cult. It leads you into all horrible things. And I remember when I was working at Avenue Coffee, when I was a barista there helping to start that coffee shop along with some friends of mine, I'll never forget a few of the customers that started coming in decided that they wanted to start playing Dungeons and Dragons at the coffee shop. And I immediately thought of my college professor, thought of all of the warnings he had given me, and started to get really worried, really scared. And I started, thinking, oh man, what kind of spiritual occult practices is this going to lead this whole coffee shop into? Is it going to just undo all the work that we've been doing, all the ministry work that we've been doing? I don't know what's going to come of this, what's going to happen with these new customers and friends, and even some of our workers at the shop that were starting to participate in playing Dungeons and Dragons together. And it was one of those interesting learning experiences in my life where, as I stepped back and started to see exactly what they were doing, I realized that they were kind of catching glimpses of a truth that I think is a biblical truth. I think is a truth that the church should know better than anybody else. But I felt like I was seeing it better in this group of Dungeons and Dragons players than I was seeing it in the church itself. And that was really the truth of the community that they had together. They used to bring food, they used to eat together, they used to just really live their lives together and build this deep community around this game that they were playing. And I was really taken aback just by how deep the community was in this Dungeons and Dragons group. In fact, a close friend of mine who is also a church planter, his name is Ben Abbott, I had a conversation with him several years later where he had a similar experience where he kind of encountered a group of Dungeons and Dragons players and just realized that in a lot of ways they were more fully expressing the community that he felt like the church should be than what a lot of churches actually are. They had a deeper relationship and community themselves than what a lot of the people who are Christians, who should actually know the truths of the gospel and the truths of community in the church, experience in our own lives. And so he actually ended up doing a very interesting church plant focused specifically on a lot of those groups of people who like to play tabletop games and Dungeons and Dragons and all kinds of different things, because he felt like they had already glimpsed a truth. They had already glimpsed the truth of community, and he wanted to take that and leverage that for the Lord. And that's something that I think we need to really take into account as Christians. I think lots of times we are trying to find ways to condemn what the world is doing. And I would rather start to take this attitude of opening our eyes, trying to find the things that we can affirm rather than condemn. What are the things that the people in the world are doing that we think perfectly aligns with God's truth? And how can we kind of help to magnify that, help to show them those ways that those amazing truths that we find in the Bible are also the truths that they are experiencing in the world. Rather than figuring out ways to condemn them, like I said, I want to focus on ways that we can affirm the awesome things that we see in them. Just like I saw that Dungeons and Dragons group create a better community than a lot of churches I had seen, I would encourage you, just with any non-Christians you know, any people that you know that aren't a part of the church or a church, I would encourage you when you get to know them, when you build relationships with them, try to find ways that you can affirm the truths that you see in their lives that you think are also biblical truths of God, the things that they are saying that maybe the church people are missing sometimes. And that's a specific just kind of way that we can learn about the way that sometimes the people from outside, the Gentiles, the Magi, not the people, not the Jews, not the direct people of Israel, they can have sort of a better perspective and a better view on truth than we can in the church. And I think we need to have that humility to be able to acknowledge that in a lot of ways, acknowledge that even some of these people from outside may have a better perspective of what's actually going on in the church. But I also think that there is a real reality to the fact that all of these other powers in the world, possibly some of these gods and powers that the Magi were also involved in worshiping, I think a lot of times we forget the fact that they were obviously studying the stars. They were following one particular star, and there's a lot of evidence to say that they were possibly involved in a lot of study of astrology and of the skies. And in that ancient time period, that study of astrology and of the skies was something that was also closely connected with the worship of a lot of other gods and a lot of these other powers in the world. And it's interesting, as I have learned more about the existence of all of those other powers, I've started to really learn that it really helps to flesh out and inform what the gospel itself actually is. There's a passage in Colossians that I think perfectly sums up exactly what I'm trying to say. And it comes from Colossians chapter 2, and it's verses 13 and 15. And I want you to focus on, first off, the way that the Apostle Paul starts this verse, where he mentions the gospel in the way that we're probably used to hearing about the gospel. But I want you to notice the second half of what he says, and the way that he actually mentions these powers, these principalities and powers, and how their existence is also very closely connected to what the gospel is actually all about. So starting in verse 13, he says, "When you were dead in your sins and in the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made you alive with Christ. He forgave us all our sins, having canceled the charge of our legal indebtedness, which stood against us and condemned us. He has taken it away, nailing it to the cross." If you've grown up in church, that sounds like the gospel. That's what you've heard. You have been forgiven of your sins. Jesus took those sins and he nailed them to the cross. But verse 15 is equally a part of that gospel message that the Apostle Paul is saying. And so he continues his thought, and he says, "And having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross." The reason it's become so important to me to acknowledge the existence of these other supernatural powers in the world is because I've really started to see that we sometimes put all of our focus, all of the guilt on people and on the individuals themselves. We focus on that first half of the Colossians passage, and we like to tell people they need to acknowledge that they're a sinner, they need to acknowledge that Jesus forgave them of their sins. And we couch the gospel completely in what the one individual has done or not done, in our own individual sins, in our own need for forgiveness for those sins. But as I've read through the entirety of the New Testament especially, I've started to see that it was just as important for a lot of the early Christians that not only did Jesus make a way for us to be forgiven personally for our individual sins, but he actually triumphed over a lot of these powers that exist in the world, over these other gods that all of these other Gentile nations had, over a lot of these forces that are at work in the rest of the world. Because you see, these gods, they were connected with very specific things that still have a lot of power today. They were gods of money. They were gods of sex. They were gods of drunkenness, gods of pleasure, gods of all kinds of riches and debauchery. We may not call those things gods anymore, but if we are honest with ourselves and acknowledge what we see at work in the world, we have to acknowledge that those powers seem to still be in charge. And I think this is one of the most incredible things that I've seen from the gospel, when you really learn the full gospel, not just that first part of forgiveness of individual sins, but you start to see the ways in which God has triumphed over all of those powers of darkness themselves at the cross. And what that does as we change that perspective is I notice that it really helps us to have more mercy and grace for other people. We start to understand that the people of the world are people who are slaves to a lot of these dark supernatural powers themselves. They individually may want to make their lives better, but they themselves are under the thumb of a lot of these powers of darkness. And I think one of the most amazing aspects of the gospel is that it proclaims a freedom from those powers for those people. And that's something that I want to focus on specifically in all of our presentations of the gospel here at Wayfarers. Which leads me to my last point, which is just those specific gifts that the Magi gave. The gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh. I love the fact that each of those gifts connects with a different one of the key characteristics of Jesus and what he has done for us. He is the king. He is the one who is in charge. He is the King of Kings who has overcome all of those other want-to-be kings and powers that exist in the world. He is the one that is fully in charge. He is also God himself. He is the God who is not only the powerful creator God that created all of it, that created everything, but he is the God who loves and cares for us specifically. And finally, that amazing aspect of the cross itself and of Jesus' death and the way that his death has accomplished a freedom for us from our own sins and from all of these powers of darkness that exist in the world. And each of those things has been a way that I've been trying to constantly remind myself of those things and acknowledge the fact that those things are all also a part of the gospel story. And so that's why this week I was really encouraged. I got to record a video of Joey, one of our worship leaders here. He recorded a video of himself playing a song that he wrote with his brother, and it's a Christmas song specifically. But what I loved when I was listening to the words and just paying attention to the lyrics of what was written in this Christmas song is that I loved the ways that Joey was able to make this Christmas song not just about the Christmas story, but about the gospel story itself, about the things that each of those three gifts represent, and all of the amazing blessings that Jesus has purchased for us. So I wanted to end today just by giving you a chance to listen to that song, and I would encourage you to just pay attention to the words. Listen to the ways that this Christmas story, the one that we are so familiar with, can really truly connect with the gospel, good news, and the blessings that we are promised in Jesus. So let's play that song.
Savior who washes me share the majestic birthright, the blood-bought child of the King. Our liberty was in a manger, wrapped in swaddling